you ever played in a D&D campaign and realized very quickly that the character that you've built is not really what you thought it was? And especially as a beginner, there's quite a lot of features, progression, all these sorts of things that come in as you level that you're not 100% aware of. Well, today I'll be talking about how, after just a couple of sessions, I've retired my Ranger OIIie. Hey everyone, this is Sergio and welcome to Assume Control. This is a channel about learning D&D. As a beginner, there's many mistakes that can be made, and today we'll be talking about probably one of the bigger ones that you could possibly make. Remember that this is a channel from that beginner's perspective, and so please let me know in the comments whether you see anything that I'm misinterpreting, over or underrating, or just want to share your experience with something similar that I'm detailing here today. So today we'll be jumping into how I've officially retired my Ranger, OIIie, and have re-rolled into a different character to continue on in my first campaign. Now this is a very large decision, and I think in this particular case, I've only been in 2 campaigns, and in both cases, I wasn't really put through a maybe more structured or intentful session 0. The second campaign that I'm in, the session sort of happened prior to me joining, and so I wasn't around, but I could at least see what most people were playing. In this particular case with this campaign that OIIie found himself in, this was definitely a much more casual campaign. Think of it as like boss monster of the month, still some underlying storyline that maybe ties through, but it's less about our particular characters and their backstory, and more just about getting together, having fun, and providing a little world for us to play in. Now, I do want to be clear that this was not a decision that I made very lightly. I thought about it very extensively, and as my campaign is once a month, effectively I started playing the character, we had our session 0 with them, and then 3 months later is when I, in real time, decided to make this switch. So this isn't like a weekly campaign where in the span of just a couple of weeks, I suddenly had a desire to play something different. No, this is something I thought about for a very long time, and during that course of the 3 months, I also was able to consume and see a lot of D&D content and understand a little bit more about not just the Ranger class in particular, but other classes and subclasses that exist and kind of how they've been designed. And it's kind of opened my eyes to a few things that I now have on like a short list of checkboxes that need to be met whenever I do play a character. Now at the very top, some things that are particularly obvious playing D&D, but maybe you don't feel until you've actually gone through the motions and started playing in your sessions. Number 1, you'll be playing this character for a very long time, right? You're not going to have an option to get to 5th level and then say, oh, maybe I actually want to be this other subclass, or oh, actually I just want to change what my feat was at level 4. You're not going to be able to do that. I mean, unless your DM happens to have a system built out where you can go back and maybe make adjustments as the world develops. But in sort of standard plain D&D, that's not an option. The second obvious thing is that there's not a substantial number of decisions to be made, at least in terms of like how you can uniquely shape your character. Now, this is a little bit of a caveat sort of statement, because if you're a spellcaster, then you have much more options, right? Just preparing your spells is a big decision in what you're going to be having available to you on a given day. Now, for a martial character, I'm assuming we're going to get to around level 10. That might mean only a couple feats, and depending on your subclass or your class, you may not have actually any like options to what happens. You might just gain certain abilities. All of this to say is that a lot of the work into how your character plays and feels at the table will come more so on how you tie your character's design and the concept of your character to the class. And you need to be comfortable with knowing that you're going to be playing this over many, many sessions, which in real life may span a year plus. And you need to be aware that you're likely not going to be able to do any takesy-backsies. Now, in my case, I was able to do it just because this is very early and it's a more casual setting, and I am ripping the Band-Aid immediately. And the caveat is that I cannot switch now. I'm locked in. No matter what, I am playing the new character that I am playing. But I wanted to talk about how I went from creating this character, having this concept, all the way to ending up wanting to not want to play it anymore. To start this process, when I first was creating this character, OIIie, I was completely new to D&D. I had only one shot under my belt, which we played with the same DM, and we had a lot of fun. And so I decided to sign up for that campaign that he was planning on starting. And so as I was looking through what to play, I didn't exactly have like a whole knowledge bank in my brain as to how every class and subclass operates, and some things to maybe look out for when it comes to playing a particular character. My experience really was from watching things like Dimension 20, a little bit of Critical Role, and then some other one-off sort of shows that would be posted on YouTube. And so a lot of my perspective was more on like the story of the character, and really the mechanics were sort of secondary. You kind of just did them as a part of the story. Not that the combat isn't fun, it's very fun. But there was a lot of story that was injected into things like Dimension 20 and Critical Role, right? That's a lot of their ability and their uniqueness is to have such a fleshed out world. And so as I was kind of going through, a couple of the things that I thought of keeping in mind as I went through the different classes was simplicity, like ease of use, that sort of thing. Just trying to kind of keep an eye on something that seemed straightforward. What I stumbled upon was a video on YouTube about a ranger build, in particular a melee ranger build. And it sort of made use of Hunter's Mark, and it seemed pretty straightforward to me, right? You get a couple free uses of Hunter's Mark, you target somebody with it, you concentrate on that spell, and then you go in and you start swinging, right? You're a dual wielder, you have a couple of attacks. When you reach level 5, you'll have 3 attacks. If you take dual wielder, you'll have a 4th attack. So there's many ways to sort of boost number of attacks, and that's kind of like the basic idea. And the sort of cherry on top was that you're a half caster, and so you get access to some cool secondary abilities. And on paper, this seemed like a great idea. I'm pretty mobile as a ranger. I'll have some utility spells. The way I do my damage is pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to have to think too much about that. I can think more about broad strategy things or my story. And that's kind of what I did. I wrote this sort of backstory for OIIie, and kind of how he ended up kind of on the streets and kind of how he ended up adventuring. It was quite a detailed backstory, at least relative to especially other players. I think nobody else really had a backstory except for me. And that's kind of where I put my efforts, was writing that backstory out a little bit and just focusing on the first few levels. So what went wrong, or what did I begin to notice? Well, after a couple of combats, several combats with the character, it became clear that my gameplay loop was very stagnant. I picked something, just as I described before, and I attack it until it dies. And once that does happen, I attack the next thing until it dies. I don't have very many spell slots as a half-caster, and so, with the way that our party was sort of built together, we have limited support, and so I feel obligated to keep a number of spell slots open for healing. It would be nice to use Shield, which is, I took Magic Initiate Wizard to be able to have access to Shield. I get 1 free use of that. But, with multiple combats in a given day, I'll typically want to, and I did, end up using Shield at least once from my actual spell slot reserves. And that left me with very little optionality on my spell slots. I basically just sort of sat on them for the most part. Now, a big part of what the sort of game plan was with the character was to make use of spell scrolls and scribing them as often as I could, but that would mean that that's a drain on my money. And, early game, I'll feel that impact quite a bit more. I think, as we leveled up, money maybe would become more available, and so I wouldn't feel it as bad, but I don't know. These spell scrolls would only be useful insofar as I can do stuff maybe out of combat, or if I have bonus action spell scrolls, I think I can maybe still use them as bonus actions. But because I'm so focused on hitting with my melee weapons, using any spells that used my main action to do felt really bad, right? Because I'd be missing out on, at level 5, like I said, potentially 3 or 4 attacks, which is just not going to be worth any spell, right? I mean, if I'm able to output 4d6 from my melee swings, plus the modifiers, plus another 4d6 for each of those attacks from Hunter's Mark, for a total of 8d6 plus whatever the ability modifiers are, I'm going to want to do that way more than casting Longstrider or Jump or whatever it is. that could potentially remove an enemy completely and be more valuable than healing someone at the particular time. Something secondary that I began to notice was that I became very inflexible in combat. If I marked somebody, if I happened to maybe be early in initiative, or it doesn't really matter, but if I got to move and position and select a target early on, something may happen in subsequent turns that makes me want to attack a different target or reposition. But now I'm losing my hunter's mark, right? If I switch targets to somebody else because there's some sort of priority, then I've wasted that hunter's mark. I could come back to that target, but who knows how many rounds it's going to be. Combats are usually only around 4 plus or minus 1 or 2 rounds of combat. I might not get a chance to actually go back to that target I marked. And so this inflexibility, even though I had thought of this character as a skirmisher, right? You're dual wielding dex, you're moving around. As a ranger, you eventually even get like a climb speed or whatever equal to your movement. And so you're very malleable on the terrain. You end up not really playing that way. You end up sort of becoming this rock that just like moves up to an enemy and you just sort of stand there trading blows with this enemy until they die or you die. And so what I had thought of at the time was, well, what if I multi-classed out of ranger? And the idea was to go 5 ranger for extra attack, get a couple of unique spells, but in reality, not really that much other than extra attack and like the combat, the fighting style, and like the weapon masteries, and then immediately dip out into cleric. And the idea was to provide something that our team didn't really have, which was sort of like area of effect damage, some sort of battlefield control, and to also boost my own defensive ability. That eventually you're able to cast something like Shield of Faith without concentration. I can obviously use Spirit Guardians. And then I'm also able to Guided Strike for our rogues, right? To make sure that they're getting their sneak attack damage on their turns. In theory and on paper, this seemed like a great sort of compensation move here to kind of spice up the ranger gameplay. And because I would be switching to a full caster, progress my spell slots a little bit faster and give me a little bit more leeway on that end of the spectrum between martial and caster. The main thing that I didn't really think of and, spent the subsequent weeks kind of contemplating was that it's going to take a long time to get Ranger 5 and Cleric 5 in general. That's level 10, character level 10. We might only get to level 10. I don't know how far we're going to get, but even if we got to like level 13 or something with our monthly sessions and a level up taking somewhere between 2 and 3 sessions, do the math on how many sessions that's going to be. That's years from now. And so while on paper and like in terms of like the general gameplay, I think it does alleviate some of the problems. It looks fine. I can do some damage still. I'm doing AoE, some magic damage, some melee damage, kind of alternating between things and still having the utility of a caster. So I have some of that flexibility. In reality, the level by level experience is going to be quite painful, I think. And I end up basically being the same character for like 7 or 8 levels until I start getting the subclass from Cleric. The idea was to go War Domain, if I did not say that. And so that's character level 8, right? Ranger 5, Cleric 3. That's a long time. And I don't know if I can go 8 levels playing how I am playing now, because that's how it would be, right? I'd still be playing the same way. Nothing dramatic happens. And so as I kind of came upon this realization, as well as looking at other classes, I was looking at some of the fellow party members' classes, kind of how their features developed over time, enhancing their gameplay, evolving their gameplay, especially for something like a Battle Master Fighter or a Warlock. They get so many different tools, and even the rogues get options for how to leverage their sneak attack if they want different effects to be placed on their enemies. All of these other characters seem to evolve over time. And then I would look at the Ranger and just go like, man, I don't see any evolution at all. And in this particular campaign, survival, stuff like that is not a big portion. And so I guess, in post decision making, looking at kind of what the Ranger is known for is like survival and wilderness stuff. And I happen to not really need that in this particular campaign. And so one of the strengths of Ranger is kind of tossed out the window. And when you start to look at the sort of features that exist, there's between 3 and 4 features that are centered around Hunter's Mark, many of them not coming until post level 10 anyways. And so it's a little difficult to build around that and to expect to even reach those levels. And so for many of these reasons, I decided to retire OIIie and swap out the character that I am playing in this campaign. I do want to revisit Ranger, I think, in the future. I think a couple of the ways to spice up the gameplay would, number one, be going more of like the bow or crossbow route, being a ranged Ranger. That can kind of give you maybe more options for using your spell casting, give you a little bit of a micro game system of like positioning and kiting enemies and stuff like that. I think it would enhance some of the gameplay tremendously, even with the same abilities. I think I would perhaps also look at making use of the Beastmaster subclass, maybe even going like a small species to be able to ride the monster or the beast as sort of like a mount. I think that would be really awesome and really adds to the experience and the theme of the character. And something that I want to also keep an eye out for future characters that I develop is trying to be as single-classed as possible. As much as I like the idea of multi-classing, and I've seen many different multi-class builds online, different ideas, I think the reality of gameplay is that if you're starting at level 1 or level 3, and this is not a one-shot, you're having to like live through the levels, I think most multi-classes feel bad. I mean, unless you're going like single class for many levels, in which case you're kind of doing a single class build at that point for many levels. I think you have to be really considerate about how that feels at the table in terms of your game-to-game, session-to-session experience. And there has to be really appealing reasons, both story-wise and gameplay-wise, to multi-class. I think in this particular case, trying to go for an even split between Ranger and Cleric, while the Cleric maybe alleviates some of the issues of the Ranger, and the Ranger maybe adds a little bit to the Cleric. In the end, it's just a very painful, I think, session-to-session experience. So what am I playing instead of the Ranger? Well, let's flip over to the new character. All right, this is Edric Saltmere, also goes by Salty. This is going to be a Circle of the Sea Druid. I might do a separate video going into the full details of what this character build is or what's the idea, but it's quite simple, right? I'm going fighter first level for Constitution saving throw proficiency, some armor proficiencies and weapon proficiencies, as well as getting a fighting style, which I've taken blind sight. And then everything else is going to be Druid. So instead of going for a 5-5, 5-10, whatever the split, anything of that, just one level in fighter, and then everything else is going to be Druid. No thinking required. I get to be a full caster, obviously, other than the one fighter level. That gives me a lot more access to more spell usage, more spell options, while still allowing me to be sort of a mid to front ranged combatant, supporting our fighter in the front lines, offering far more battlefield control as a Druid, especially as a soon-to-be Circle of the Sea Druid. Obviously, I don't have my subclass yet in the one session that I've played this character, but I believe we'll be leveling up after the next one, so I'll have my subclass in full force. But I'm already having way more fun with this character. The options that are available, even with the wild shape. Obviously, this isn't at full power yet since I don't have my subclass, but every level is going to feel fantastic, right? Either I'm gaining new spell options, gaining my new features from Druid or subclass features. I'm just getting stuff all over the place with every level, and I don't have to think about it, in terms of splitting up between multiple classes. I just keep going Druid, and it just keeps getting better and better. And so I really love that. It really alleviates a lot of the overhead with trying to manage a build and figuring out the right time to swap out. Maybe there's a place in the future to try a more intense multi-class build. But, when starting from a lower level, it's, I think, a little bit more difficult to pull off in terms of the gameplay experience. And so, yeah, Edric is, as I mentioned, a Circle of the Sea Druid. My main kind of idea here is going to be using my spells, whether it's an emanation, a ground effect, some sort of control. Can use those to affect the battlefield. I can use my bonus action once I level to use my Wrath of the Sea feature, which is sort of a small emanation around me to deal some damage and to knock some enemies back. Just kind of repositioning enemies, sort of navigating the battlefield a little bit with more impact. I don't have Hunter's Mark, so I can kind of just switch targets as needed, knocking one back and then maybe piling piling on to whoever my fighter is with, or falling back to help allies, who are from ranged. I can kind of do all these things freely and not have to worry too much about it. I'll be using Shillelagh for the most part with True Strike. You do see a rare item here. Maybe it's a sign that it was good to swap out characters. I was able to get this. I'm only level 3, and having a rare item is pretty crazy. But since I'm not level 5 yet, and I'm not getting the bonus damage quite yet from Shillelagh, at least not as high as possible, I'll be using this Battle Axe for a little while. I do have the Topple Mastery with this, so I can True Strike with this weapon, and I'll deal just fine in terms of damage. I think it's the same as Shillelagh, D8 at this level, so nothing too crazy going on here. In the future, I will switch back to probably a quarterstaff if I'm able to trade this rare out for something else, maybe down the road. But yeah, I mean, it's full caster, so I'll have all of the spells that a full caster can kind of have access to. I'm a little bit more party-oriented. I have guidance, which is really awesome for any spell or skill checks, so that's really good. It's sort of the full package of what you would expect. Blade Ward as an easy thing. I do have Magic Initiate Wizard, again giving me access to the shield spell. I won't feel as bad because I will be progressing spell slots much more quickly with this particular build. True Strike is going to be my bread and butter for some free damage in the melee. Absorb Elements, Cure Wounds, just general items or spells to kind of have. Entangle, if I get into the melee, I need to lock down some people. Fairy Fire, Invisibility, kind of managing that. We do get a familiar with Wild Companion, so that's pretty useful, just for like scouting purposes. I prefer not to do like the advantage cheese. I tend to like to position it to make sure we're not getting flanked by things, and if I really need it, I guess I can bring it in to help with my attacks. And right now, I'm not level 3, so I don't have any of my subclass free spells, but I have Thunder Wave. That combined very nicely with our rogue who uses Booming Blade just to trigger the damage. So that's pretty fun synergy there. And obviously only level 2 druid, so the spells aren't immaculate quite yet. But it will only improve with every single level, which feels great. I think I prefer the idea of being maybe mediocre to start, but seeing that progression over time, as opposed to the Ranger who maybe starts off hot with their auto attack and Hunter's Mark damage, but then kind of just stays there and then eventually falls off. That feels way worse. So I'd rather start low and then rise up rather than be, up there and then kind of fall off a cliff. And so, yeah, using a shield as well. So we've got a nice beefy 18 AC. Yeah, really enjoyed the Edric. Playing Salty here was way more fun. And I have a lot more excitement about the future of the character. And so this has been a very huge learning moment for me as a beginner D&D player, and I think really changes the perspective on how I approach building characters. Mostly avoiding Ranger, I feel like, just because, I don't know, their features I'm realizing slowly over time doesn't feel great as you level up. You're not being as rewarded as maybe other classes are. And I think part of it also has to deal with, I play a sorcerer, primarily a sorcerer in my second campaign that I'm in. I'm only in these 2 campaigns. And I'm beginning to realize just how powerful being like a caster is, like a full caster. It's quite remarkable what options you have available to you and how you can just like single-handedly make a fight like so one-sided with just correct spell and placement, usage. It's hard to imagine a martial providing the same experience. And so maybe I'll make a video about that. I'm sure most people have discussed this over and over again because it seems like a pretty clear divide. And so unless your class is providing some sort of secondary benefit, if you're not a full caster and you don't have these other benefits from your features, it can be really hard to, I guess, be in favor of playing that particular character. But anyways, for now, I will leave it at that. This has been a beginner's learning experience and having to re-roll their character. I do feel bad for OIIie. Put a lot of effort into building him out to start with and making the backstory. But it just it wasn't the right place, it wasn't the right time. And I just didn't have the correct knowledge to kind of see where the issues may be and maybe build it out in a slightly different way to alleviate them at an earlier level. But for now, we'll leave it at that. If for those out there who have maybe had a similar experience, whether it was with a ranger character or with something else in their campaign where they just felt compelled to ask the DM to be able to swap out. How did that go? Way more casual on my end, so it was very easy to just kind of ask and have it happen. But I'd be curious to know what you guys would do in this situation and how maybe you would build out a ranger to be fun and to progress over time. Let me know your thoughts, and until next time, have a great day.